Hey friends, tonight we start with something a little different. We're going back thousands of years before smartphones, before planners, before the atomic habits TikTok threads, back to a time when consistency wasn't a trend. It was survival. It wasn't packaged in motivational books or daily trackers. It was built into the very rhythm of life. We're talking about ancient Egypt, the civilization that stared down deserts and dynasties and still managed to build a legacy so consistent its echoes can still be felt in the stone today. But first, if you enjoy these dives into ancient wisdom reimagined for modern life, go ahead and subscribe, but only if you genuinely like what I do here. And in the comments, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. I love seeing the little constellation of listeners lighting up around the world. All right, lights down, maybe turn on a fan for that soft hum. Let's step out of our timeline for a bit, because what the Egyptians knew about consistency, we've forgotten, and it's time we remembered. You wake up to the rising sun not because of an alarm clock or a productivity hack, but because Ra, the sun god, has made his return. Again, for the 10,000th time. He sails across the sky in his solar bark, battling darkness and chaos with each pass. And every morning, when you wake to that golden light streaming over the Nile, it's not just a new day, it's proof that the cycle holds. The world hasn't ended. The gods are still rowing the ship. That's consistency. For the Egyptians, the universe wasn't a place of random chance. It was a carefully ordered system they called ma'at, balance, harmony, rhythm. To live without it was to fall into isfet, disorder, chaos, destruction. So whether you were a farmer, a priest, or someone chiseling stones for another monument, you lived in alignment with a cosmic beat. You didn't just practice consistency. You worshipped it. Picture yourself now, a worker rising with the dawn in a modest home along the Nile floodplain. Your job today? Same as yesterday, same as tomorrow. You're helping build a granary, not a pyramid this time, but something even more important to your people. A place to store life, to preserve grain for the lean season. Every brick you place matters, every hour a rhythm, every week a notch carved into your own life's stone. You don't get bored, you get into it. Because in this culture, repetition isn't a rut, it's divine. The Greeks and Romans would later talk about array, excellence through mastery. But the Egyptians, they practiced it daily, quietly, without applause, without likes. They didn't hustle for hacks. They worked because Ma'at demanded it. That's the first forgotten lesson. Consistency isn't sexy, it's sacred. Let's zoom out, the Nile, one river, but also the civilization's clock, compass, and calendar. Every year, like clockwork, it flooded. Every year, the silt settled, the crops came, the people lived. Egypt wasn't just consistent, it was consistency. From dynasty to dynasty, over 3,000 years of nearly unbroken cultural identity. To put that in perspective, the United States is less than 300 years old. And in that time, we've rewritten our norms, our values, our habits dozens of times. That's not bad, it's the nature of progress. But it makes you wonder, what did they understand about long-term thinking that we don't? It's here that we come to our second lost lesson. The rhythm of nature is your best teacher. The Egyptians didn't fight nature's cycles, they synchronized with them. When the Nile rose, they sowed. When it receded, they built. Their year was broken into 3 seasons. Akhet, inundation, Peret, growth, and Shemu, harvest. No wasted seasons, just different forms of work. Compare that to today. We push through seasons. We grind in winter, sprint in summer, chase quarterly goals while ignoring the rhythms of our body, the moods of the month, the mental tides that rise and fall with the moon. We expect progress to look like a straight line, but the Egyptians would have laughed at that. Progress is a floodplain. It looks empty until it doesn't. They knew when to wait, when to act, when to rest. Consistency wasn't about doing the same thing every day. It was about returning to the right thing at the right time, again and again. Now imagine the scribes, the elite few who could read and write. They copied the same religious texts, moral treatises, and agricultural manuals over and over again, by hand. Not just to duplicate them, but because repetition taught discipline. By transcribing the instructions of Ptahhotep for the 90th time, they weren't just preserving wisdom, they were absorbing it, line by careful line. One such teaching reads, "Do not be proud of your knowledge. Take counsel with the ignorant as well as the wise. For the limits of skill have not been set, and there is no artisan who has fully mastered his craft. That's the third lesson. Mastery is humility in motion. The Egyptians didn't believe you ever arrived, even the gods worked daily. Even kings were judged by Ma'at after death. That mindset, that quiet, relentless improvement, it's the foundation of habit. Let's come forward in time just a little. You're an artisan now. Maybe a potter, maybe a sculptor. You live in Thebes. The tools in your hand were shaped by your father and his father before him. You've made hundreds of bowls, maybe thousands. But today's bowl still matters, still requires you to show up fully, to place your fingerprint in the clay, because one day your son might hold it, or a priest, or a king. That's another key lesson. Consistency is legacy in disguise. The bowl isn't just a bowl, it's a message. I was here, I cared. And if you repeat that act of care long enough, your entire life becomes a sculpture of meaning, not dramatic, not loud, but built to last. Now let's walk through one of the greatest testaments to Egyptian consistency, the pyramids. Not just because they're big, not because they're beautiful, but because of how they were built. Contrary to the myth of slaves toiling under cruel masters, many Egyptologists now believe the pyramid workers were skilled laborers, well-fed, housed in decent villages, proud of their role. They worked in rotating crews, they specialized, they innovated. Think about this. The Great Pyramid of Giza is made of over 2 million blocks, some weighing as much as 70 tons. The logistics alone are mind-blowing. But more incredible than the engineering is the mindset. Someone out there laid the first stone, knowing they'd be long gone before the last was placed. That's not just faith. That's vision-led consistency. We tend to think of consistency as something you do to get quick results. Go to the gym for a month, see abs, write every day, get the book deal. But the Egyptians didn't think in days or even years. They thought in dynasties. And that brings us to the fourth lesson. If your consistency isn't tied to something bigger than you, it won't last. The worker who cut stone for the king's tomb, he wasn't just building a grave. He was ensuring the pharaoh's passage into the afterlife. He was helping secure cosmic order. His job was spiritual. That kind of perspective changes everything. Suddenly, a repetitive task isn't mundane, it's sacred. Mundanity becomes ritual, effort becomes offering, and time becomes an ally, not a threat. Let's pause for a moment. We live in a world addicted to novelty. Swipe after swipe, we're conditioned to think, what's next? Our attention spans, atomized. Our sense of self, fragmented. And that's no judgment, we've all felt it. But there's something stabilizing about ancient Egypt, something steadying. They didn't fear repetition. They embraced it. Their architecture, their art, even their writing, full of loops and cycles and mirrored forms. They trusted in rhythm. You don't carve a story into stone unless you believe that story matters enough to repeat. You don't build for 20 years straight unless you believe that the outcome will outlast you. That's the fifth forgotten truth. The point of consistency isn't control, it's continuity. You can't always control your outcomes. You can't control how fast the river floods or when the harvest fails. But what you can do is keep showing up. Keep doing your part. Keep laying the brick, writing the line, turning the wheel. The Egyptians lived that way because life to them was an offering. Now let's step into a temple. It's morning. The inner sanctum is dark, cool, quiet. You are one of the few priests with access to the statue of the god, Amun perhaps. Your task every day is the same. You bathe the statue, you anoint it with sacred oils, you dress it in fine linens, you light incense, you speak the morning prayers. The god never responds. You hear no voice, see no miracle, but you do it anyway, not because you expect a reaction, but because the act itself is worship. Because order depends on your part in the pattern. That's discipline without dopamine. And that's the sixth insight. True consistency doesn't need constant reward. This might be the hardest to hold on to in modern life. We're wired to seek quick feedback. But ancient Egypt teaches something harder and deeper. The strength to act even when it feels invisible. Even when no one claps. Even when you doubt if it matters. Because it does matter. Every stroke of the chisel. Every swing of the sickle. Every quiet moment of alignment. That's how you keep Ma'at alive. And what happens when you don't? When Pharaoh Akhenaten tried to upend the traditional gods and introduce his own radical monotheism, abandoning the centuries-old rituals, it destabilized not just religion, but the very identity of Egypt. People were lost. The order was broken. Temples fell quiet. After his death, the old ways returned, not because people feared change, but because they craved rhythm, the security of the cycle, the comfort of tradition, not in a rigid, nostalgic way, but in the way a heartbeat comforts the body. It meant life was still happening. So here's the seventh, maybe the most practical lesson yet. If you want to change your life, start by rebuilding your rhythm. Not your goals, not your outcomes, your rhythm. Ask yourself, what time do I rise? What do I return to daily? Where is my inner calendar misaligned? The Egyptians knew that to shift destiny, you had to sync with something deeper. Let's talk about their writing for a moment. Hieroglyphs, a language of symbols, many of which repeated again and again. The owl, the reed, the ankh. These weren't just phonetic tools, they were sacred icons. Scribes could spend decades mastering them. Why? Because the Egyptians believed that writing was not just communication, it was creation. The word had power. To write something was to give it form. To write it again was to make it real. Consistency was literally how you brought a thing into being. So here's the eighth lesson. What you repeat, you become. Repeat fear, you become afraid. Repeat anger, you harden. Repeat curiosity, discipline, care, you sculpt yourself into something durable. The Egyptians didn't journal their feelings in moleskines, but their entire civilization was a journal, a consistent physical memory. Temples, tombs, tools, all of it, habit turned into history. You stand beneath a stone colossus. Its eyes have stared into the horizon for nearly 4,000 years. Behind it, a temple wall is carved with scenes of offering, farming, reading, mourning, loving, moments of ordinary life, immortalized in hieroglyphs. And here's where it hits you. These weren't just royal chronicles or sacred rituals. These were schedules, routines, systems for living. The Egyptians didn't separate the sacred from the mundane the way we do now. Every task, from plowing fields to pouring wine, had a ritual form, a correct way. Not for perfectionism's sake, but because they believed the order of the cosmos depended on it. The gods might rule the heavens, but it was human habits that upheld the world. They had a word for this invisible thread that held everything together, ma'at. Ma'at was truth, order, harmony, cosmic balance. But it wasn't abstract, it lived in behavior. To live with ma'at meant showing up when you said you would, treating people with fairness, tending to your crops, cleaning your home, honoring your parents, speaking honestly even when it was hard. In modern terms, discipline, respect, consistency, self-governance. The tiny daily acts that seem forgettable but shape who we are. For the Egyptians, this wasn't self-help fluff. It was spiritual gravity. Every day you failed to uphold ma'at didn't just throw off your mood, it threw the universe closer to chaos. Imagine that level of accountability. But also, imagine the power in it. Because unlike the ever-changing values of today's culture, where success means one thing this week and another the next, ma'at didn't shift. It was the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. And that meant something extraordinary. You always knew what to do next. You didn't have to wait for motivation to strike, or for your circumstances to become ideal. If the sun rose, you rose. If your work waited, you showed up. No flair, no dopamine chasing, just faith in the rhythm. It sounds hard, but it's also deeply freeing. In our world, we worship productivity, but it's productivity tied to outcomes, not process. The Egyptians didn't obsess over how much they could get done. They focused on whether they did things the right way, the way that kept life in balance. There's a story about an Egyptian farmer whose daily walk to the river was so consistent, the sand around his feet carved a permanent groove in the earth. That wasn't an accident. That was the point. Your habits should leave a mark, not on Instagram, on the world around you. And here's where their brilliance really shines through. See, to the Egyptians, time wasn't just a line you traveled down. It was something you built. They believed every day was a brick in the temple of your life. If you skipped a brick, the wall was weaker. If you rushed a layer, the structure leaned. So they built slow, deliberate, but with awe-inspiring consistency. Take the Temple of Karnak. It took 2,000 years to complete. Dynasties rose and fell, wars were fought, famine swept the land, and still the work continued. One block at a time. Priests passed their duties to apprentices. Architects left unfinished drawings. Every generation honored the rhythm, trusting that the vision would outlive them. Now ask yourself, what are you building that will outlast you? We chase overnight transformations. They embraced century-long evolution. Theirs was a culture that understood. Greatness isn't built with intensity, it's built with continuity. That's not sexy, but it is sacred. And what made it work wasn't superhuman effort, it was structure. The Egyptians engineered their entire civilization around predictability. Annual floods, harvest rituals, temple processions, morning prayers. They didn't leave discipline up to willpower, they made it a default. We try to feel our way into action. They designed their environment to pull them into it. A farmer knew when to sow because the calendar said so. A scribe knew when to copy texts because the sun hit the column just right. A baker kneaded dough before dawn because the temple's rhythm demanded it. There was no asking, "Do I feel like it today?" They aligned their life with the river, and the river didn't ask permission to flow. Modern psychology calls this cue-based behavior. The Egyptians called it life. And this is the insight we've lost. We keep searching for a better version of ourselves, thinking the answer is hidden in some perfect morning routine or another self-optimization app. But the Egyptians would tell you, you already have what you need. The question isn't whether you're capable, it's whether you're aligned. Are your days in rhythm with your deeper values? Are your actions building something worthy, or are you just rearranging the bricks? Because here's what scared the Egyptians most. Not death, but dying without Ma'at. There's a famous scene in the Book of the Dead, the weighing of the heart. When you die, your heart is placed on a scale. On the other side, a feather. The feather of Ma'at. If your heart is heavier, weighed down with chaos, laziness, falsehood, it's devoured by a monster. Your name is erased from memory. But if it balances, if your life was lived with consistency, truth, and order, you pass into eternity. In other words, your habits decided your afterlife. What a terrifying and beautiful idea. Imagine standing at the end of your life and having to answer for how you used your time. Not what you achieved, but how faithfully you showed up. Did you follow through even when it was hard? Did you keep promises even when no one was watching? Did you resist the urge to fall into chaos even when it was easier? The Egyptians would say, that is the measure of a life. So what do we do with all this? You're not an Egyptian farmer. You don't live in a world of temple bells and sun calendars. Your chaos is emails, traffic, burnout, doom scrolling, and the stakes don't feel cosmic. They feel personal. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe we've shrunk our lives to fit inside productivity tools and self-improvement checklists. Maybe we've forgotten that what we do every day matters more than how we feel doing it. Maybe we've forgotten what the Egyptians knew, that every small act is sacred if you choose to treat it that way. Let me tell you a quick story. An archaeologist once found a worker's diary scratched into limestone near the Valley of the Kings, just a common laborer. He wrote, "Today I lifted 43 blocks. I sweated. I cursed the heat. But I did not stop. I am proud." He wasn't building his own tomb. He wasn't being celebrated. He just showed up, again and again, because the work meant something. That kind of devotion is rare now, but it's not extinct. Because here's the truth that scares us. Discipline is not about perfection. It's about presence. It's about showing up, not when it's easy, but when it's ordinary. It's about brushing your teeth with focus, answering that hard email without spiraling, sitting down to write, even when inspiration is silent, making a meal with your phone in the other room, lifting your 43 blocks, whatever that means for you, and walking away proud, even if no one else sees it. That's what the Egyptians mastered. Their greatness didn't come from genius. It came from consistency under pressure, repetition with reverence. They didn't chase novelty. They built with patience. And you can do that too. The real shift, the habit shift, is when you stop looking for the feeling and start looking for the flow. That's what Ma'at was. Flow with the universe, with the people around you, with your own deeper nature. And flow doesn't mean ease. It means alignment. The kind of alignment that makes hard things worth doing, that gives weight to your routine and power to your presence. Modern science, ironically, is starting to echo the same idea. Behavioral psychology now shows us that identity-based habits, small repeated actions tied to your core values, are more sustainable than outcome-based goals. In other words, don't try to get fit. Be the kind of person who honors their body every day. Don't try to write a book. Be the kind of person who writes. Identity through action. ritual through repetition. The Egyptians didn't wait for enlightenment to act with purpose. They believed that acting with purpose brought enlightenment. They didn't rush, they didn't multitask, they weren't perfect, but they built the only structures on Earth still standing after 4,000 years. That's not nostalgia, that's a blueprint. So here's your shift. Start small. Pick one act and make it sacred. Maybe it's your morning coffee, your commute, your 15 minutes of journaling, the way you greet your partner or shut down your computer at the end of the day. Whatever it is, make it a temple. Not with candles or crystals, but with presence, with structure, with consistency that says, this matters. Not because someone is watching, but because you are. Because how you do this one thing is how you'll do the next, and the next, and the next. You don't need to overhaul your life. You need to return to rhythm, to ma'at. And no, you don't have to believe your actions balance the cosmos. But ask yourself, what if they did? What if the way you handle the tiniest details, brushing your teeth, folding your clothes, answering your mom's text, was the true measure of who you are? Not for status, but for alignment, integrity, a feather-light heart. You don't need a new planner, or a productivity hack, or the perfect motivational quote. You need meaningful repetition. You need to build your own Karnak, block by block, choice by choice, knowing that the work will take time, and that's okay. Because the Egyptians weren't building for now, they were building for forever. And maybe so are you. So here we are, 4,000 years later, sitting in a modern world of endless pings, infinite scroll, and urgent distractions, trying to remember something the Egyptians never forgot. That consistency is sacred. Not because it's flashy, or efficient, or even rewarding in the moment, but because it's real. In a world of filters and shortcuts, showing up again and again, without applause, without immediate results, is one of the most radical things you can do. We're told to chase passion, to find purpose, to live our truth. But what if your truth isn't something you find? What if it's something you build? One choice at a time, one habit at a time, one morning, one ritual, one breath at a time. That's what the Egyptians were doing. They weren't just stacking stones, they were stacking moments of intention, over and over, until even the gods took notice. Their rituals weren't glamorous, they were often tedious, repetitive, quiet, but they did them anyway, because to them, how you lived each day mattered more than what you achieved. Let that sink in, because maybe we've gotten that backward. Maybe it's not about chasing breakthroughs. Maybe it's about practicing your truth so steadily, so stubbornly, that eventually breakthroughs chase you. Think about that for a second. How would you live differently if you truly believed that small, repeated acts had the power to shape not just your life, but your legacy? Would you keep waiting for motivation? Would you keep restarting on Monday? Or would you look down at your own hands, rough with effort, steady with practice, and realize you're already becoming someone else? That's the real lesson hidden in Egyptian consistency. Not perfection, becoming. Becoming someone who doesn't need to be told what matters because you've already decided. And that decision shows up in how you live, again and again, no matter what. Now I want to leave you with something small, something ancient. In many Egyptian tombs, there was a simple phrase carved alongside the name of the deceased. It read, he kept balance. Not he was rich, not he was famous, not he was successful. Just he kept balance. That was the highest honor. So here's your final habit shift. Keep your balance. Not through force, not through chasing everything at once, but through rhythm, through repetition. Through remembering that even the smallest act, if done with care, is an offering. To your future self, to the world around you, to the unknown parts of you that are waiting for consistency to wake them up. So maybe tomorrow when you rise and do that one thing, that stretch, that page, that breath, that call, you'll do it like an Egyptian. You'll do it not because it's dramatic, but because it's yours, because it's what you do, because it's how pyramids are built, because it's how lives are changed, one aligned, ordinary sacred moment at a time. Now, if this video gave you something to think about, maybe something you needed to remember, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's one habit you're going to treat like a temple from now on? And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing. This channel is where ancient wisdom meets modern momentum. One story, one shift, one human moment at a time. I'll see you in the next one. And until then, keep building.